and take care of something. I titled the lesson, God's Glory Manifested Forever. The Christian's final and ultimate destination, or home, is not merely a place to visit, but a place to live permanently. We've all heard the phrase, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Beauty surrounds us every day. Some is of God's beauty, what God has made, and some is the beauty of man-made objects. However, this beauty is fleeting when it's compared to the eternal city, the New Jerusalem, and God's glory sustaining that city. And when that happens, when we're in the New Jerusalem, everything on earth will be gone anyway, so this beauty that is here is only fleeting. Here today, it's not kind of speaking, gone tomorrow. There we will see God's power, His provision, and His protection waiting for God's people, the redeemed, and where we will be permanently with our Lord, our final dwelling place, secure for all eternity in the presence of God and of the Lamb. In today's scripture, we're continuing chapter 21 of Revelations. John sees a great city coming down from the heavens. This is the New Jerusalem, the source of joy for all of God's people. A vision of the prophet Ezekiel provides a most notable Old Testament comparison to John's vision. And if you want to look that up, it's in Ezekiel chapters 40 through 48. And you can compare what John is seeing and what Ezekiel saw. The book of Ezekiel's vision includes the dimension of the heavenly temple and its courts to reflect God's glory, a life-giving river flowing from the temple, and the boundary and the divisions of a re-established Israel. And it culminates as Ezekiel sees the gates and the dimensions of the city. Thus these visions point to God's faithfulness to His people. As I said, we will continue. We studied the first 8 chapters, 8 verses last week. I purposely left out verse number 9. So Dawn is going to read verse number 9, because verse number 9 is a transition that I felt like we need to put in today's lesson. So if Dawn doesn't, she'll read 9 through 11.
And there came unto me one of the 7 angels, which had the 7 vials of full of the 7 last plagues, and talked with me, saying, Come hither, I will show thee the bride, the Lamb's wife. And he carried me away in the spirit to a great and high place, mountain, and showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God, and her light was like unto a stone most precious, even like a jasper stone, clear as crystal.
So John describes, as Donna read in verse 9, being carried away by one of the 7 angels. And in the spirit, we can infer, means that this is a vision. Okay, so he's there kind of mentally, but not maybe bodily. From his vantage point of the great mountain, or the high mountain, John saw the holy and great city of Jerusalem. God will establish His New Jerusalem, where He will dwell with His people. Right now, He's in heaven and we're on earth, so there's this big gap between us. But when the New Jerusalem comes down, it will set on top of the mountain. We talked about that last week, like on top of Brushy Mountain, since it's 3,000 feet up, and therefore we will have direct access to it at all times. Goes on to say, also the prophet Zechariah anticipated the manifestation of God's glory in this city, and even Isaiah highlighted the city's splendor in God's new creation. So there's 2 other references that you can look back on. The vision of the city descending from heaven serves as a representation of God's relationship with humanity. God's city, His dwelling place, will come down to be among His people. Think back in Genesis. God was with His people, the cloud by day and the fire by night. He was in their midst, but He's no longer that visible in the midst. At this time, He will be that visible for all of us to see, and we will be with Him. Thus, God will be present with His people in this city. We will have direct access to Him, and we will not need a go-between. Right now, Jesus is the go-between. He came to pay for our sin debt, and so back in the Old Testament, they had to go to the priest, and the priest had to make sacrifices. That was a go-between. We don't need any more. We will be there with Him, so there'll be no go-between. Since this city is from God, He is worthy of all of the highest praise and honor that the city's citizens, us, can give him. It goes on to tell you, now we start to see what he is seeing. And we can't imagine what this is going to look like, okay? The glory of God becomes the light. So the celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, the stars, they're no longer needed for sources of light. God's glory will light up this city entirely. A stone most precious provides a tangible parallel to the radiance of God's glory. And this stone's radiance is like that of a crystal. The only thing I could think of is like, prisms or crystals, when the light hits, how they reflect and make different colors in. I don't know what it's going to look like. It says it's like a crystal. That's the only reference I would know in that point. But anyway, its radiance is so bright, it will shine, and there'll be no darkness. There won't be a spot or a shadow of anywhere, because it's all going to be light. All right, 12 through 14, Eva.
And had a wall great and high, and had 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and names written thereon, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. On the east 3 gates, on the north 3 gates, on the south 3 gates, and on the west 3 gates. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and in them the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb.
We think of a city's walls as a means of protection, strength, and unity. We want to keep something out. Well, that's not the purpose here. In John's vision, the heavenly city's enemies, they have been destroyed. They have got their final destination, the lake of fire. Therefore, this wall will not serve to keep our adversaries out, but rather it is a great and high wall that will hold God's glory and purity. The inclusion of the 12 gates parallels Ezekiel's vision. Each gate is named for one of the 12 sons of Israel, the foundation of God's people, and for the New Jerusalem. And each gate is guarded by an angel. The vision reassures all who would hear, all of God's people will be included in this city. The multiple gates of the New Jerusalem, they never close. All the people of God from all the parts of the earth are invited to enter the New Jerusalem. In other words, every nation, every tribe, every language will worship God in this city. The 12 foundations, they are named for the 12 apostles. And that includes the one that replaced Judas. This highlights the heavenly city's fundamental origin and its source, along with the cornerstone, Christ the Lamb. John highlights God's work in salvation history. The presence of both Israel and the church emphasizes the scope of God's covenant for his people. The New Jerusalem, all of God's people will be united so that God's glory might be on display. Verse 15 through 17, Bert.
And he that talked with me had a golden reed to measure the city, and the gates therefore, and the walls therefore. And the city length 4 square, and the length is as large as the breadth, and he measured the city with the reed, 12,000 furlongs. The length and the breadth and the height of it are equal. And he measured the wall therefore as 144 cubits, according to the measure of a man, that is, of the angel.
So the angel talked with John. Remember in verse 9 said he carried him away and said, "Come up here closer to me." So he talks with John, and he used a reed to measure the dimensions of this city. John had previously used a reed to measure the temple of God. We find this in Revelations 11, chapter 11, verse 1. However, in this instance, the angel provided the golden reed to measure the city, its gates, and its wall. Again, the image is reminiscent of Ezekiel's vision. In both visions, Ezekiel's and John, the act of measuring reveals the perfection of God's handiwork. Each dimension of the New Jerusalem, its length, its breadth, and its height, is identical. The city measures a cube 4 square. New Jerusalem resembles the dimensions of the most holy house. Remember that was in the tabernacle and the temple, you had the Holy of Holies. Okay, that's what that's referring to, the place where God's glory dwells among his people. God in his glory will live with his people in the New Jerusalem. Also, the city's dimensions draw attention to the holiness of the temple. No need for the holy place now, or the most holy place, because the entire city will be the holy place. God is in the entire city. He covers it like this. If this room was the city, he would be wall to wall, floor to ceiling. He'd be totally covered everything. The angel then measured the wall, 144 cubits, or in other words, about 72 yards. And that's not very far. 3 times that, because it's 3 feet in a yard. You multiply that, and you're looking at about 200 some feet. So that's not very. It's very small in size. However, its purpose is not to exclude the people. Rather, the wall's dimensions possibly represent 144,000 redeemed. I'm going with what your commentary says here. I couldn't find any other reference on that. So they're thinking, remember the 144,000 they talk about in Revelation, that redeemed from the nation? So according to your commentary here, he's saying that's possibly what that wall is. So I don't know. I couldn't find anything else on that one. This inclusion, or their inclusion in the city's design, along with the 12 tribes of Israel, the apostles, and the prophets, all acknowledge the totality of God in this holy city. 18 through 20, Susan.
And the building of the wall of it was jasper, and the city was pure gold like unto clear glass. And the foundations of the wall of the city were garnished with all manner of precious stones. First foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, the third
Caledonia,
the fourth an emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth
Sardis,
the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth the topaz, the 10th the
Chrysoprase.
the 11th the jacinth, and the 12th an amethyst.
Have no idea what this stone looks like. And a couple other ones that I don't know what they look like either. However, when you start going through their colors, they represent like the colors of the rainbow. They're red, they're blue, they're green, and so forth. So can you imagine what that's going to look like? Absolutely not. So we talk about beauty and glory. We can't imagine that. Okay, so it says John described God sitting on the throne, appearing like a jasper. It says it is no coincidence that John envisions the city's walls made of the same material, because the radiance of God surrounds the city. As I said, he's wall to wall, top to bottom. So he completes it. Now John describes or indicates the presence of God with gold. Further, the city's purity was unparalleled, making it look like clear glass, more refined than what human hands can produce. And then in verse 19 and 20, he talked about all these stones. It says, the foundation of the wall to be built out of these precious stones were unusual, and they were indicative of the city's heavenly nature. However, God does not reserve splendor or grandeur in the construction of his city. Thus, the beauty of the New Jerusalem stands in direct contrast to any earthly beauty that you would think is out of this world. And therefore, what we have on earth is only temporary beauty or wealth anyway. God on the throne and the glory of God are both imagined with the appearance of jasper and something like sardius. Even the deep blue shade of sapphire is compared to the clarity of the sky. A rainbow, like unto an emerald, shone above God's throne. Now we've seen rainbows here, and they're pretty. But you know, some of those colors are so thin or faded like it's really hard to see. Can you imagine this rainbow? You're going to see every one of those colors very, very clearly. But he takes this and he takes it back to an Old Testament example. So it says the listing of these stones might invite us to compare another listing of these precious stones, and they were on the outside of the high priestess breastplate. It says the New Jerusalem is without a temple because the mediating work of the priest is no longer needed. Matter of fact, it says we will be priests. So we don't need a priest for us, we will be there. God dwells with his people as among a kingdom of priests. And the foundation stones serve as an outerwear for the heavenly city, just as the stones were utilized for the outerwear of Israel's high priest. Further, John previously heard the declaration of the marriage of the Lamb to his bride, God's chosen, his redeemed people. The heavenly city is described as a bride or the Lamb's wife. So, in this instance, she is adorned with wearing these outer precious stones for she is prepared for her wedding day. So she's also decked out in all this, just like the high priest would have been decked out, because she is meeting her groom. He is meeting his bride. The precious stones inlaid in the foundation of the New Jerusalem highlight the precision and the beauty of God's creative acts. Each unique stone shows us that God is not a God of chaos, but of beauty and purpose. Out of Zion, the perfection of beauty, God has shined. We find this in Psalm 50, verse 2. And our last verse today, Kim, do you mind reading 21?
And the 12 gates were 12 pearls. Every several gate was of one pearl. And the street of the city was pure gold, as it were transparent glass.
Even behind its walls, the city displays incredible beauty. John speaks of only one street, and it is made of, come on in, and it is made of pure gold. Like the jasper of the city walls, the pure gold is transparent as glass. God's glory and the ideal of life are represented by this refined street. John would describe a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and flowing out into the middle of this golden street. Like the trees lining a boulevard, or even trees that we see lining our streets, this tree of life stood on both sides of the street, and only God could do that. Think about going up the road here. We got trees on the right and trees on the left, and they don't come across. This one here is on both sides, and it's one tree. So, who could only do that? God. So even though He displays beauty, more importantly, God will bring new life, and He will restore His creation to His glory. So the New Jerusalem's coming down. We will have direct access forever with Him if we are included in the redeemed. The Apostle John used vivid language to describe a glorious and splendid heavenly city. Unlike earthly cities, this heavenly city glows with the brightness of God's glory. God's glory shines through the city more vivid and illuminating than sunlight. Our hope as believers is that we will someday worship God in that beautiful city, our heavenly city, and there will be no place like it. What we think is beautiful on this earth, and as I said, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. What you think is beautiful, I may not, but here there'll be no doubt and there'll be no questions. It will be beautiful, and it is all made by God. Ashley, can you close in prayer?
Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this lesson, and just thank you, Lord, for going before us, Lord, and making all this beautiful stuff, dear God. We can't wait to see it. Just pray that you be with all those that we've mentioned on the prayer list, that you'll touch their needs in a special way. Just be with us as we go through the next service, Lord, that you'll be in the midst of that, and also throughout the week, Lord, in our revival. Just be with us, give us traveling mercies home and back and forth to and from church. And it's in your name we pray. Amen.